How do the different ways of knowing interact in the development of fear? Fear is something we, as humans, experience almost every single day in some form or another. It can take the shape of a test we are afraid to fail at, or possibly embarrassing ourselves, or in the more severe cases, endangering our lives. However, what you are afraid of may be the exact opposite of the person next to you. Because our fears vary from person to person, it is important to analyze why and how our fears emerged. This helps to distinguish between reasonable fears that will end up saving ourselves from the possibility of shame or pain, or the detrimental fears that will waste our time. This is where the ways of knowing, including language, memory, and reason, come into play, as they are the main deciding factors that explain why an individual fears what they do. People's fears can fall into two commonly used terms, rational and irrational. It is often the case that people will all share some very basic fears, like the fear of spiders or the fear of heights, which actually affects 5% of the US population. These things just carry a harmful reputation that influences people's perception of them. While these may be common and understandable, there are other fears that are harder to explain. These types of fears are considered the irrational ones, and though fewer people have them, they are often the most extreme and exotic of the two. The line between rational and irrational can be hard to draw though, but is possible with the acknowledgement of the influences of language, memory, and reason. Memory is the first way of knowing that plays a role in the development of people's fear. Nearly everything we know is based off of previous experiences, which makes it inevitable that our fears would be as well. Memory serves as a defense mechanism in order to prevent old bad experiences from happening again. It is easy to explain and justify fears using our memories because we can just blame our fears on a bad incident. In some cases, the use of memory really does just this. It protects us from danger. There are, however, other cases of bad memories causing more trouble than good. Given that we live in a very imperfect world, there's almost a bad situation or story associated with everything we do. For example, over the course of the development of the airplane, it is no surprise that a few have been defective and gone down, resulting in people fearing the possibility of this happening to them. This mindset is shared by roughly 25 million people in the United States who have aviophobia, or the fear of airplanes, as they remember all of the newspaper articles and stories detailing these unfortunate plane crashes. All the while, the odds of actually being killed in an airplane crash are 1 in 4.7 million, making airplanes realistically a lot safer than a majority of other things we do throughout our daily lives. Aviophobics, though, do not recognize this, potentially inhibiting them from living a full life due to their irrational fears. The second way of knowing is language. While memories can cause deep-rooted fears, language can also cause fear just from the word of mouth. Now, most people have a fear of poisonous snakes because we have all heard stories of extremely painful snake bites and the tragedy that accompanies them. These stories are usually told in a particular way, suggesting that snakes are these man-hunting, vicious creatures. The use of specifically chosen language is the key to making this kind of impression in people. Words like slither and venomous are utilized to make the listeners uncomfortable and are enough to make people associate the discomfort of these words or the misery of an actual snake bite with all snakes everywhere. These types of fears come from not much more than gossip, and exaggerated tales are the types that are shared by a particular society. While over 51% of people in the United States fear these reptiles, the number is not nearly as high in Australia, where they're exposed to and deal with snakes more regularly. This is because in the United States, we tell horror stories of snakes and share our fearful opinions with those around us, while in Australia, the average person has less interest in a scary snake story. Overall, the word choice used can make false impressions in the minds of listeners, with no real basis or justification for the fear besides hearsay. While the two previous ways of knowing explain why some people have what is considered irrational fears, reason can explain why there are extremely common and justified fears. Imagine you are walking down the street in a sketchy area and a person comes running toward you with a pointed gun. This situation would evoke fear in almost everybody for very rational reasons, including the large amount of injuries caused by guns and the high crime rate of the area. The main distinguishing factor between rational and irrational fears is the probability of the danger. While the fear of airplanes and snakes do not have the statistics to support them, there's actually a good chance of being shot in an interaction with a gun. Rational fears are the fears of the more common incidents in life. Another example of this would be the fear of heart disease and cancer, because they are the top 2 causes of death in the United States. Now, these 3 ways of knowing are not the only ones that play a role in the development of fear, but are very prominent nonetheless. Fear itself, though, can be broken down too. At first, fear was used to help us as humans survive. We would fear our potential dangers because if we didn't, death would soon follow, and after all, survival is the ultimate biological goal of living organisms. Over time, though, technology and medicine have developed, and we, as a civilization, no longer need to fear the numerous dangers we used to, diminishing the purpose for fear. But today, this leaves us with the question, what even is the point of fear anymore? Considering we no longer must depend on it for survival, and oftentimes it just keeps us from being risk takers. Well, in order to answer that question, we must first know what exactly fear is. Fear is the emotion that people feel when they sense that they are in danger. It is a protective emotion which signals this danger and helps a person to prepare for and cope with it. Fear includes physical, mental, and behavioral reactions. Mentally, fear triggers thoughts about the danger or threat that the person senses. The physical reaction to fear is called the fight or flight response. Fight or flight is an involuntary response, something that a person cannot control consciously, but that is controlled by the body's nervous system. Fear and anxiety are similar emotions, but with an important difference. Fear is the emotion that people feel when a danger is actually present, while anxiety is the fear connected with worrying about danger that might happen. Based upon that explanation, fear is still helpful to protect us from the danger that exists in our modern world, while anxiety is what people may argue as useless. As previously mentioned, most of our fear as living organisms springs from our fear of death. Now, as obvious as a question as it might seem, it is important to wonder why exactly we fear death. Many people would answer that it seems painful, but in reality, most people fear death because it is the completely unknown, and it is unfathomable to imagine not being a living, breathing, thinking person anymore. This fear of death guides our actions, keeping us from stepping into busy streets and jumping off of buildings. However, with the vast number of Christians out there, this should not be the case. According to the Christian faith, along with other religions as well, there is a plan after death, in this case being heaven or hell. Now, the followers probably believe that they are going to heaven, so why are people still so afraid of dying? Or do all of the Christian followers account for the minority of the population who don't fear death? And lastly, is there a way that fearing death does not necessarily contradict the Christian faith? All of these questions are personal ones that ultimately those individuals can only answer for themselves, based upon the 4th way of knowing, faith. Back to the central knowledge question, how do the different ways of knowing interact in the development of fear? Memory, language, and reason all interact in a way that leaves everybody with their own sense of what is scary. However, when comparing an individual's fears with others, some fears are considered rational, while others are considered irrational, usually depending on whether or not the feared situation is likely to end in danger or not. Even with rational fears, fear plays a role that can sometimes cross the line from helpful to harmful, while anxiety essentially plays no positive role at all. Overall, fear helps humans to survive even in our current world and is really decided by our previous experiences, how we share our fears among our society, and the probability of danger.